Hello everyone. So this is my presentation on project-based learning. I titled it Project-Based Learning, a Brief Guide. So we'll start chapter 3, Imagining the Possibilities. Just to give you a summary, so finding the big idea, that's what they called it. So kind of just like what is the main focus of your project? What's it all going to add up to? What are all the elements that are going to tie into it? How are you going to bring in all of the different subjects to enhance their learning on this certain project? So kind of like, what do you want that your students to take away most from this project? What concepts do you want them to take away the most? And then another part of that, so how and why is it important? Again, sort of why are we choosing to do it this way? And how is it going to be more beneficial for the students? And then how does it relate to real life? So that was kind of one that really stuck out to me when I was reading it. I worked at a project-based school all last year, and making it relative to the students' lives is really what kind of pushed the learning forward. So if you can make it relative to their life and real world concepts, then it makes it much more tangible for them to understand and to really dive into learning it and on their own in their own way. In other words, the book kept mentioning keeping it authentic and having authentic learning. So keeping it related to real world concepts is how you do that. Also, something else that was mentioned, so when the project offers value to the community, the students become more interested. That was one thing I gained definitely from experience. If there was ways that we could make the school better or show that we were learning all this cool stuff to others, the students were much more interested in putting in the work to just for the payoff of it almost. Another step in this is to not be afraid to step out of the box. So a lot of the times I feel like teachers get stuck kind of in their ability box where it's scary for us to have to go out and learn new concepts and new things, but it'll help our students. So just to don't be afraid to go outside of your comfort zone and to learn new things along with them. Also, having like a community of people and collaborating your ideas with others is also helpful in getting out of that box. So making the switch from project-based to passion-based was something I really liked. I read the book by, oh my goodness, now I lost his name here, but the professor who said that, he is all about being driven by the student interest. So just changing it from project-based learning, so this is the general project, to passion-based learning. So what are the students passionate about? What do they want to make a change in their community? What do they want to see happen? And then finding ways to correlate the standards and the learning objectives kind of to their passions is what I thought was really cool. Chapter 4, Strategies for Discovery. So it doesn't have to come from scratch, which I thought was really comforting. So when thinking about project-based learning, it's kind of like, wow, how am I supposed to create a project that's going to not only wow my students and their parents, but get them to learn everything that they need to be, that we're responsible for teaching them and that they need to know. You can borrow it from others, take projects and take different pieces from every little thing that you might like, talk it over with your colleagues, talk it over with your students, and figure out what's going to work best for your classroom. So that was the part of learn to critique and change it to make it your own. So definitely add your own spin to it and take student feedback because it is their project and it's what they want to create. So it's important to collaborate with them as well. But when thinking about the main, starting it and beginning and just square one, it doesn't have to be something totally organic. It can come from different bits and pieces of other projects that people have done and their feedback on if it worked or if it didn't work. All of that is super important to look for. And this chapter also talked about looking out for potential pitfalls. So just like the length and the objective of a project, sometimes it's easy to get caught up in like minor details or minor activities, and that just that lengthens the project and it lessens the outcome of their learning. So if you get stuck somewhere taking a week or something on a activity that was only supposed to take a day, it definitely sucks up a lot of the time for other learning to happen. Don't be too scared or don't be too scripted, and let the students make some of the critical decisions. This was something that really stood out to me because I feel like project-based learning is so student-driven. It should come from their interests and what they want to learn. So obviously not the whole project can be that way, but definitely listening to the students and not having everything so planned out in like set in stone, concrete, because if it's not working, it needs to be changed. And that's kind of something that comes from the students. So it's important to listen to them and where they want to take the project. Not forgetting to assess. So that was something that I definitely would have forgotten. I forget that assessment doesn't come just at the end, but that you're constantly assessing. And that was even something I learned last semester in our observations, was just how to assess throughout and constantly checking for understanding and things like that. But in this case, assessment is different. It's just kind of like checking in and making sure the students are at where they need to be at for the project to continue on as a whole. And then the last one that they mentioned was it should mirror real world quality. So just not to underestimate your students. I feel like sometimes in a project-based learning environment, it's kind of like, oh, a free-for-all, and because it's so student-led that we forget what the quality should reflect. But if they're expected to, like the teacher gave an example of writing a story to be posted in a newspaper. If it was newspaper quality, they sent it in and it got posted, which was a super cool thing for students to see, that their quality of work could be out there in the real world. It wasn't just classroom based. So I think that keeping those standards really helps us to drive the learning forward. And then I also liked that there was many different ways to frame a project. Because that's kind of where I get stuck also when thinking about project-based learning. So just the different ideas that it could be about comparing and contrasting or making predictions, cause and effect. I know the big project we did last year as a class was looking at change over time for the Native American tribes that were in the area. So from then to now, that was our frame of our project. It could be centered on it should be centered on a driving question. So how has this change affected the community? That could be the driving question. And it's kind of like a broad question that has a lot of room for to be taken in different avenues. Oops. And then lastly, chapter 5, the formative assessment. So there's assessing for learning, which is formative, so it's along the way. It can help to adjust the project where it needs adjusting. It's a time when students can kind of check in on where they're at with their learning. And also it's continuous, so it's the whole time. The whole process of their learning, we should be assessing how they're doing, asking questions, checking for understanding. It's that kind of assessment, and that's the formative. And then assessing of learning is kind of at the end. So it's the summative assessment. You're assessing how the student performed, if their work is up to quality, if they, met the objective. And then also along with assessing the student, you're also assessing the project. So how did it work for your classroom and your students? How did it work for the community? Are there parts of it that you would change or parts of it that you would improve on to do different or to impact your students differently? I think that reflective piece at the end is a super important part of project-based learning, because without it, it's kind of like you're flatlining. You don't really improve or get better. Like project-based learning can be so impressive if you reflect and you take it one day at a time. also, this chapter talks about creating the big picture first and then working backwards. That's kind of how I took it in. So where do you want to be like at the end? What do you want the students to have learned? What do you want them to have gained from this project? And then kind of work backwards to figure out your steps and your assessments along the way. And that's why I liked this image here. So objectives, activities, evidence, it's all kind of like a cohesive working unit. It all relates to each other. So without the objectives, you wouldn't know what kind of activities they would be needing, and there would be no evidence that they were learning the objectives. So it all needs to work together for the students to gain what they need to gain. And then the project timeline, that's definitely something that will be helpful for me in the future. So I liked that they talked about setting milestones, so just chunking the information together and making it manageable for the students. The projects can be super overwhelming, and if you look at just the big picture, it's kind of like, I don't know, it feels like you're sinking. There's so much to do in such, like an 8-week period. But if you set little milestones for the students, it definitely makes it feel like they're accomplishing a lot more. And it's also kind of a way to assess. This also keeps the students on, so with the assessment, it keeps the students on top of their work and accountable for quality. So if the project is that they're creating pamphlets to sell to the school, or that was just an example, one of their milestones could be having one of the information blocks done by the first week, and then they have to check it and revise it and get it edited. And that's kind of just keeping them accountable for their quality of their work, so that it doesn't come as one big sloppy mess at the end. Also, I liked that having the milestones marked visually in front of the class could be super helpful. I know that I'm a visual learner, so if I see something, not that that's teaching me specifically, but it just keeps me in check for when I need to have things done. And that's kind of comforting, because once you start checking them off, it's like a visual reminder that you're doing it, you're making it through. The other part was the planned check-ins. So it's good. Also, it's kind of like an accountability piece, but not just for the teacher and the student, but from student to student. So if it's a group project or if it's just individual, the student can assess how they're doing themselves and how well they think they're either performing, or if they're meeting the objectives, if they're gaining the knowledge and the information that they need to. That was a really big piece of it. And then the last part that I liked that they added in was just to mix it up. So don't make the daily, I feel like it's important to assess every day, but don't make it all the same. I liked that they gave a lot of different suggestions for how to assess at the end, because it can kind of be difficult, and I feel like it's easy to get stuck in the same pattern of like, oh, write me what you did today, or write me what you learned today. But I liked that they had different ideas for assessment. So it could be written, they could talk about it with a partner, you could interview a partner and then write what they said. My favorite was the video confession, kind of like reality TV. So if you had it could be as simple as a camera set up in the corner of a classroom every day, and just at some point throughout the day, go and talk about how you feel about the project. Give it, let it out. So I thought that was a really creative way to assess and to check in on how your students are doing. And this all came from the Reinventing Project-Based Learning, Your Field Guide to Real-World Projects in the Digital Age. It was by Susie Boss and Jane Cross, and it was on chapters 3 through 5. Very helpful. I'm very excited to do project-based learning in my classroom in the future, and I think this book will be an awesome aid to it all. Thank you.